Today I'm going to talk with you about something that's it's a topic that divides people. It's a topic that almost no one will talk about. And those that do talk about this topic usually get banned from any and all platforms still just for mentioning it. And I need you to bear with me on this because this is something that has been laid on my heart to start sharing. I have researched the world wars. I can't say thoroughly because they're such broad, huge topics. But I will just say that the further and further I dig, the more I have a confirmed understanding of some of the true nature of what happened during the world wars. And this is something that every single person in the world needs to understand. If you live in Europe, if you live in Australia, if you live in America, you need to understand because the world wars shaped the countries of the world since that time, for the last century. And this is a serious topic. Please do not think that I enter into this discussion lightly at all. And if you've trusted me with any of the other material that I've shared on my channel, I ask that you simply trust me that I have done the same level of research on the stuff that I'm going to share with you in this video and in the videos that come to follow this one, because I don't think that this is going to be a short endeavor to start to explain what actually occurred in the world wars at that time in history. And I'll say, when I found this out, when I found some of these things out, at first I questioned myself because it was so pivotal to your understanding of what's going on in the world right now. So pivotal. I questioned myself. There's been, over the years, I have backtracked and wondered if I was all wrong, if I needed to restart the research and undo the research. But then again, the more I dug, the more I was confirmed in the things I was studying instead of led away from those things. So again, every time I dig deeper on this, the worse it looks, not the better. The more divergent it looks from the historical narrative that we are all taught in school, the wool has been pulled over our eyes so heavily. And this, I believe, this topic is the cornerstone of that in the modern time. Now, of course, on my channel, we've done a lot of things in Christianity, the Catholic Church, Rome, all these different foundational things that do shape your understanding of the world, especially in a religious sense. But this will help you understand the shape of the world in a political sense. And that's why it's so foundational. And I think that if some of this does open your eyes to some of the historical elements of the time of the First and Second World War, then you will be on the right path. I'm convinced 100% that that is the right path, that the history we've been taught about these things has been taught to us by Britain and America. And the atrocities that Britain and America are responsible for during the world wars are too many to count. Now, you may already be shaking your head saying, I don't understand what you just said. Because for the average citizen in a Western country in the world right now, we are taught that America and Britain saved the world during World War II. Saved the world. Isn't that what we're taught? Americans were taught by propaganda videos before they went overseas to fight in Europe. They were taught of the insurmountable evil that must be stamped out in Middle Europe so that we could save the world. That was what our soldiers were taught. But the actual history shows us something quite different if we're willing to dig. The problem is we're usually not willing to dig. I had to force myself into this topic. And I had the same problem. I was unwilling to go far enough to learn. And to be completely frank, it is overwhelming, the amount of information that has to be combed through to get beneath the veneer, to get past the shade they pull over your eyes. And I'm saying all of this because I know this topic is going to rub some people just a horribly wrong way. If it makes you feel any better, I have family members that fought in the wars that we're going to be talking about. And so I have a vested interest as much as anyone in finding out the truth of what happened during the world wars. What actually happened, not what our governments told us, but what was the truth of the situation. So I hope you understand where I'm coming from on this. I'm not trying to, outshock the next YouTuber by bringing something out that's just shocking and can't be believed. That's not my goal here at all. I literally believe this is foundational to our understanding of the modern time. So with that introduction, I hope that you get a lot out of this. There's probably going to be a number of videos in this series that will have to do with World War I and World War II and the events that surrounded. In an effort, and this is my number one and only goal, is to help people understand the true history that has been hidden from us. Because I understand how much information has to be digested to get it. And so what I'm doing is I'm compressing all that information into a presentation so you can digest it. And I guarantee that if you dig into the things that I'm going to talk about, you will find the same answers. But they just won't tell you that. You won't hear that from a college professor. You won't hear it from the news media. You will not hear it from almost any documentary. Precious few even touch the subject. Again, I just feel that this is so pivotal. So bear with me. I just hope and pray that you get a spark of light out of this information that helps you move forward, that helps you understand, that helps you make sense of what is going on in our world. Thank you. If you do any amount of research these days on the Nazis, specifically on the internet, in YouTube, in Google, if you search, you're going to find all sorts of information that the Nazis were these occult, ritualistic, obsessive madmen who were trying to create an ultra mega race of individuals that could take over the earth. Now, even saying that to myself, I sound ridiculous. But that's the narrative that's given when you go searching online, anywhere. Even if you read books, generally, I'll show you this book. This is one of the most popular books that has come out in recent time about the Nazis and their occult involvement. It's by Thule and Veleda, called Unholy Alliance. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many books. I even got this book. I bought this book from a used bookstore. I just saw it, and so I thought I'd read it. The Nazis and the Occult by D. Sklar. I read about halfway through this book, and then I realized something that was happening when I was reading through this book. And you guys know me. I read thoroughly. I read completely. I didn't skip through it. I was reading this book front to back. And what I found as I was going through is that it was making some amazing claims about the Nazis and their occult involvement, using mediums, spiritists to contact alien beings and essentially come up with devious, evil plans about how they're going to rule the world or experiment on people, all these terrible things. And as I got about halfway through the book, I realized that I was not seeing a single reference for the material that was being said about the Nazis. Not a single reference. So I had to start wondering, because at this point, I had been studying Nazis and occult stuff. I'd been seeing the videos online, watching different stuff, learning, reading. I had collected information from websites about the Nazis building flying saucers and contacting aliens and all this other stuff. And when I got halfway through this book and found that it had zero references for the material it was giving, I started wondering, is it possible? Could it be possible that this occult narrative in regards to the Nazis is actually a cover for something? I guess I feel like I've gotten good over the years at detecting when people are throwing smoke, when they are covering for something, when a story is being told, but it's almost too fantastic to be true, and it smells like and sounds like they're covering for something else. They're trying to lead you off the trail of something that they don't want you to know. And so in the case of this book, as I realized there was no references for the material it was giving me about the occult involvement of the Nazis, I started questioning the book. I looked into the book a little deeper. I found that the author, Sklar, is a Polish author. And if you know anything about the war, especially between the First and Second World War, there was a time when Poland was friendly with Germany. And then towards the beginning of World War II, there was a switch in the leadership of Poland. A German sympathetic leader was switched out for a leader that was anti-German. And this Polish leader cut off all contact with Germany and was essentially a political socialist, communist. So with that being said, I realized that the Polish people had a lot of angst towards the Germans, just built in because of what happened during the war. So it led me to question, are books like these actually valid information? Should we be reading books like this and really believing everything they say about the Nazis being occultists, being seekers of alien contact, being devil worshippers, being eugenicists who want to wipe out all races except their own? I had to start questioning because I started seeing a little smoke, a little too much smoke. So that was part of the start of the journey, part of it. But recently I did this video series, and you guys on my channel will be very familiar with it. It's the Cataclysm of Rome series. I was studying for that series and I ran across some amazing information, some amazing facts about Germany in ancient times. But let's put that on the side for a second. Let's talk a little bit more about some of these allegations of occult involvement with the Nazis. You're probably aware that much of the lore surrounding the Nazis and the occultism that they are alleged to have been involved in revolves around this woman, Maria Orsic. She was said to be a medium, a spiritist. She was said by some to be a witch. But what was the real story of Maria Orsic? I recently watched a video online. It was this video by the futureforecastinggroup.com. It's actually a group that practices remote viewing. It's not an occult group. This is actually a group. Some of them are ex-military who actually did remote viewing for military purposes in their careers. But they, as a practice, as a kind of fun thing, they get together and they do remote viewing sessions on different people throughout history. And recently, the Future Forecasting Group did a remote viewing on Maria Orsic. It's very interesting. They did see some things about her. I will say, without going through the whole video, they explored a lot of different information that they came across as they remote viewed Maria Orsic. You can see here they're trying to draw photos of her as they saw in their minds before they even knew a name. They, of course, remote view without knowing the name of the target. So the idea is they are given a number by someone who does know the target, but they aren't told who the target or what the target is. So they're given this number, and based on the number, they start a remote viewing session where they simply meditate on that number and use, if you will, hunches and nudges that they receive as they go into meditative state. And they see visions and start to get information. And then, of course, they start to write that down and try to make sense of it as they go further and further with it. So you can see him trying to record what he has seen. But I will say, I went through this whole video, very interesting. I recommend it. But he never saw anything about Maria Orsic when he remote viewed that had anything to do with severely occult practices. Now, he did say she seemed to be a spiritist or a medium, someone who, I think he did mention that she might contact the dead. Of course, if you know anything about this time period in history of the world wars, even in America, it was very popular to have mediums and spiritists come to your home and either speak with the dead or receive messages from spirits. There's all sorts of stuff. Even President Lincoln, his wife was all infatuated with mediums and spiritists. And even though Lincoln didn't like having them in the home, she would bring spiritists into the home for different engagements where she would have friends over. So just to be aware, this is not like, this is something that was actually prevalent all throughout Europe and all throughout America at the time of the 1920s, 30s, etc. It was a fad. But again, his remote viewing of Maria Orsic turned up that she was a powerful medium, is pretty much the extent of the information that he received. He also received information about her being killed in Nazi Germany when the Allied forces came in and essentially murdered all the citizens in Berlin, that she was one of them. So I'm saying all that just to say that, yes, Maria Orsic is this interesting figure. And of course, most people see her as a severely occult witch or something that led the Nazis towards a dark, dark occult place in a search for evil power that they could use to take over the world. Well, let's dig a little further into Maria Orsic, or perhaps the roots from which she came. Anyone who's studied this topic at all knows that Maria and a group of other people were all part of a society. It was called the Thule Gesellschaft, the Thule Society. Now, this was a society that was dedicated. If you actually have to dig to find this out. Most websites have no idea what the Thule Society was. And so the surface level explanation you're going to get is that the Thule Society was an occult, ritualistic group that was saturated with Freemasonry and witchcraft. But that's not the whole story. The Thule Society began around 1917. And 1917 was even before the end, just before the end of the First World War. This society was started by a man named Walter Neuhaus. Now, most websites you're going to see will not mention Walter Neuhaus. They will say that the Thule Society was started by a man named Rudolf von Sabbatendorf. And the reason they do this is because Sabbatendorf was actually a Freemason and somewhat of an occultist. He had practiced Freemasonry in the Far East. And so he had kind of brought some of those practices when he came back to Europe. And he became friends with Walter Neuhaus, who had already started this society. So back to Walter Neuhaus. Now, when he started the Thule Society, it wasn't called the Thule Society, the Thule Gesellschaft. It was originally called the Studiengruppe für Germanisches Altertum. That means in English, the study group for Germanic antiquity. They were studying their own ancient lands in Germany, their culture, where they came from. And then it became the Thule Society because of the word Thule. And they met to discuss specific things. They met to discuss the Edda, which was a medieval Icelandic collection of poetry, and Nordic mythology. So that makes sense. If you know what the word Thule means, the word Thule is a word that describes a part of Germany, the northern and eastern parts of Germany, and also the lands up into Iceland and Norway. This area of the world was called Thule. It's the area of the world that experiences the midnight sun. You may know that the National Socialists, the Nazis, actually used the symbol of a midnight sun in some places. Well, it makes sense since the Thule Society was about the lands. It had to do with the study of the heritage of the lands that experienced the midnight sun in the summer months. It was a special place to them. It was a part of the foundations of their culture. So again, they studied medieval Icelandic poetry and Nordic mythology. Now, as I mentioned, many people will give Rudolf von Sabbatendorf credit for starting the Thule Society. He didn't. He joined the Thule Society after he had met Walter Neuhaus and become his friend. And then he helped found the Thule Society officially in August of 1918. Now, you may think that, well, this Sabbatendorf guy, he seemed to be an occultist. He was a Freemason after all. He had studied esotericism. But again, I want to caution you because in this time period, in the 1920s and 30s, esotericism was a huge hot topic. Madame Blavatsky, Helena Blavatsky, had written some of her books and started the Theosophy groups of Ariosophy. So this was like a fad thing, especially intellectuals were into reading the writings of the esoterists at this time. So this is not uncommon that people all over the place would know of or heard of or been involved in some of this esotericism. Now, that's not Walter Neuhaus, the guy who started Thule. But this guy, Sabbatendorf, came into the group and became a member, okay, and helped found it, helped run it. Now, it's interesting because, as you heard so far, Walter Neuhaus started the Thule group in 1917. Then along comes Sabbatendorf, and he helps found the group in 1918 and becomes a strong member. Well, guess who joins the Thule group in 1919? A young man named Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler had just come from the war. He actually fought for Germany in the war. He had earned all sorts of medals and commendations for his valor. He was a patriot as far as his country was concerned. So the study of Thule, or the ancient German lands, would have been right up his alley, something he was interested in. And he actually says this in his writings. If you've read, for instance, Hitler's Table Talk, he has different writings where he talks all about his interest in the ancient German lands, but mainly his interest in his country. He was a patriot first and foremost. So again, I'll reiterate. In 1917, Walter Neuhaus starts this Thule Society to study the ancient Germanic lands. Sabbatendorf joins in 1918. Adolf Hitler, after coming home from the war, joins the group in 1919. And this is one fact now that almost nobody reports. When you study online, you'll go to websites, you'll go to all this stuff. You'll never see this, but this is the truth. This guy, Sabbatendorf, who everybody likes to say was the reason that the Thule Society was, quote, esoteric or occultic, he left the group after Adolf Hitler joined. In the early 1920s, he left the group. He left the society completely. After having founded it, he left it because he didn't like the political focus of the group. Why is that? Because Adolf Hitler came in and started focusing the group on politics. Hitler combined the study of the ancient culture of Germany with the politics because he saw what was happening to Germany. It was changing. And of course, he had just come out of the war. He had firsthand knowledge of what was going on. But he saw the power of this group and wanted it to become something that could help the country by recapturing some of their foundational heritage, their culture. So the Freemason, Sabbatendorf, the esoterist, the occultist, is kicked out of the group. He actually ends up being expelled from Germany in 1923 because he had given names of members of the Thule Society to leaders of the communist Bavarian Soviet Republic. The communists. He was a communist sympathizer. Are you starting to get the picture here of what's going on? You have this group that is Germanic, and they are focused on their country and their heritage. And now you have a person coming in trying to change it. He is ousted from the group. He is kicked out of the country for being a communist sympathizer. And if you don't know, the communist Bavarian Soviet Republic was a republic that the communists set up in southern Germany during this time period in 1919. As a separate country, they annexed Germany. The communists annexed part of Germany. What happened then was that the Free Corps, which was a volunteer army of free Germans, they rose up along with the German military and they kicked the communists out. This is in 1919, between the world wars. This isn't even during the wars. But the communists were everywhere in Germany. So Sabbatendorf, the occultist, is kicked out. You won't read that online if you go looking unless you really dig. But after expelling the communists like Sabbatendorf and others who had betrayed the German people, they then took back over Munich from the communists in April of 1919 and got their land back. So I hope you start to see what was going on at this time. If you simply understand the different political groups inside Germany at the time we're talking about, after the Kaiser had been thrown out of the country after World War I because of the Treaty of Versailles, not because of Germany, but because of pressure from the outside of the country. They threw out the Kaiser, the monarch. He was then exiled into the Netherlands. And in place of the monarchy that Germany had had since the 1800s, they now had a republic that was set up by other foreign powers and was infiltrated by numerous socialist and communist groups. So do you see that Germany at this time was fighting for its life? And this Thule society, although people from the outside looking in now, everyone is like, oh, it was occult, it was evil, it was this, it was that. What we really see is that this group was cultural, and it became political as the Germans started to realize they were going to have to take their country back because there were communists everywhere. And we haven't even mentioned the November Revolution or any of the other things, the Kiel Mutiny, just numerous attacks on Germany by the communists between the two world wars. So it seems to make sense that Germans would rally around a group, as Adolf Hitler did, as this Walter Neuhaus had created this group, a group that was focused on the culture of Germany, where they came from, their heritage, start focusing inward. And I started to think more about Maria Orsic being a part of this group, the Thule Society. If it may not have been an occult society, then what might her involvement have been in it? It's pretty well known that she was a spiritist. She was a medium. She had some kind of gifts of a paranormal type nature, a spiritual type nature. But why would she have been involved in a cultural group like the Thule Society? Did not seem to be an occult group by any measure. And I found the answer when I was studying for my series, The Cataclysm of Rome. It may sound crazy, but I found something that explains her involvement with the Thule Society 100%. Let me introduce you to Veleda, the Germanic prophetess. I had never heard of Veleda before I started doing my research for these videos. But I ran across her because, of course, I was studying the areas of Europe, the Germanic peoples, the battles between Rome and the Germanic peoples. And I ran across her story. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Here's another image of her. There's actually quite a lot of information about Veleda, the prophetess of the Germanic people. And it's a very interesting story. Even the Roman historian Tacitus writes about Veleda, the Germanic prophetess. And Tacitus talks about Veleda saying this, that the barbarian Germans attributed to many of their women prophetic powers, and as the superstition grew, even actual divinity. And of course, this is talking about the ancient German peoples. These prophetesses turned goddesses on earth were among the most important leaders of the Germanic tribal units, apparently holding both religious and secular powers. Now, it's not fully known whether Veleda was actually the name of this prophetess, and this was in the 1st century that this actually occurred. It's not sure if that was her name because there is a Celtic title called Veleta that means prophetess. So that might actually have just been the title of this female figure. But it did seem to be a station that was held for some of these Germanic tribes. They each would have a female priestess or prophetess that would give them prophetic insight, that would lead them in spiritual matters. And it just so happens that in the revolt of the Batavi in 69 to 70 AD, that a priestess, a prophetess like Veleda was head of the Batavi. And she had prophesied that Civilis, their leader, would conquer the Romans in their revolt. And what happened actually is that most of the Germans, the Germanic peoples, survived this revolt. And tens of thousands of Romans were killed at that time. So it seems to be a very foundational cultural thing for the Germanic peoples to have a female prophetess as a type of spiritual leader for the tribe or the nation. And so when I saw this story from the 1st century, this history, I realized that Maria Orsic was exactly that. Maria Orsic was the prophetess, was seen as a echo of a far distant culture that the German people had come from. And in regards to the Thule Society, who was studying that exact thing, it makes sense that they would value the involvement of a person like Maria Orsic, a spiritist, a medium, a prophetess. They saw her as the same thing as this Veleda character from the ancient Germanic peoples. She was a spiritist who hearkened back to the ancient cultures of the German people. And because that was very important to them at this time, it seems to make sense that they would have involved people like Maria in societies like the Thule Society, and then further on in the politics of what became the most patriotic movement in German history, the National Socialist movement. A movement to take back their country from the communists who were infiltrating it, who were causing revolutions, who had tried to annex part of their country away from them. So do you see now how the narrative shifts a little when you really dig into the foundational facts of what's going on? I'll be honest, before I did some of this studying, I didn't even know what had happened in Germany between the 2 world wars. And trust me, there's a lot more to this story. And then there was the cherry on the top. And that was while I was studying the first few hundred years of history after Christ and the fall of the Roman Empire. I was also, of course, studying these Germanic lands where the tribes of the people of ancient Germany had these prophetesses like Veleda. And as I was studying, I was looking for artifacts from the time, from the lands of the Germanic peoples. And take a look at the artifact that I found of those ancient times, those specific times of the area of Germany where the Ostrogoths waged war against Rome. This is a belt buckle from one of the soldiers in the Ostrogothic army. Do you see the symbol? So when we talk about the Thule Society and Germany trying to recapture its lost heritage, it looks like that symbol is from their lost heritage from the time of Christ and beyond. It's not some ancient esoteric symbol of occultism. It's a natural symbol of their ancient peoples. And you might also wonder where the symbol of the eagle comes from that was so heavily used by the National Socialists. Well, it was also an Ostrogothic symbol of the time of the 100s, the 200s, the 300s AD after Christ. These were part of the Germanic people's heritage, the part of the German people's heritage that they were celebrating. Does that perhaps give you a new perspective on why when we see videos like this, you start to see why these symbols were used, where they came from? You start to understand why they had parades. This parade in particular is called the Day of Art Parade. Parades like this where they celebrated their ancient art from the civilization that founded them, the civilization they came from. Not a celebration of occultism, but a celebration of their roots, of their heritage. Maybe you start to understand why these people aren't worshiping a pagan deity. Instead, they're celebrating their country. They're celebrating their strength. Celebrating the heritage of the Ostrogothic warriors on horseback. Now, when you go researching this online, you won't see that this is called the Day of Art. You'll see this German name, the Tag der Deutschen Kunst. And if you hear that term, you'll never hear anyone online translate that for you. But this was called the Day of Art in Germany. And it's a parade celebrating the art of their cultural heritage. And of course, people online will play this video with foreboding music, and it sounds evil, and it makes you look at it as some evil, twisted, occultish thing. When in reality, these people are simply reclaiming their heritage. Whether it's Christian and you like it or not, they're reclaiming their own heritage in light of a world that was trying to tear their country apart at the seams. Specifically, the communists, the socialists, and in turn, mainly this was fomented by the... And if this seems just wrong to you and you can't understand it yet, if you're having a hard time understanding how that type of a parade could be a good thing, or could inspire those people as it did to feel a kinship for their fellow man in Germany and support their country with patriotism and love, then maybe it'll help for you to realize the type of parade that they are now having in the streets of Germany, in the streets of Munich. Here's the type of parade they now have in Germany. Let that sink in. Over the last few decades, they have shifted this country into something that used to be patriotic and encouraging and something that harkened back to their ancient roots. And now they have torn apart the culture, removed most of the people through immigration out of the country that actually are natives, and they're replacing their culture with this. And then maybe you need to think about, in your country, are they doing this type of thing in your country? Who is the they doing this type of thing in countries all over the world right now? The they is still the communists. The they is still the socialists. The they is still fundamentally supported, built, constructed, and run by. And by the way, if you're shaking your head going, I just can't believe any of this, I cannot believe it, that's absolutely the opposite of everything I've ever heard about Germany and the world wars, then stay tuned. Buckle up, Buttercup, because we're only scratching the surface with this video. But I hope you found it interesting to understand a little more about these things that so many online sources will say, well, these things were the foundations of occultism, dark, negative spirituality, Satanism, if you will. A desire to take over the world with evil occult work. And that just does not seem to be the case when we study the actual facts of this study group that started with Nordic and medieval Icelandic culture. There just was no evidence. There is no evidence. And you can go and beat your head against the internet for as long as you want. You will not find good evidence that the Thule Society or its predecessor, the study group of Walter Neuhaus, that it was anything but just that, a cultural, and then it became a political study group, not a occult group. There were no occult practices within the group. Again, I'm bringing this information to you to start you thinking, because there's going to be more. I feel like this information is too important to hide any longer. Even though, most platforms will deplatform people for talking about this stuff, I'm trying to be careful in the way I approach it so that we can talk about it. We can open the doors to this knowledge, this information that's been hidden from us. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I hope you see the things that I've taught today. I guarantee you should dig into them for yourself. And I'm telling you, you should dig into them for yourself. I guarantee if you do, you will come to some of the same conclusions, because I'm taking the facts as they are, without the spin, without the propaganda. Because there's so much when it comes to this. That's why I think it's so foundational. That's why I think they want to hide it so badly, is because they do not want you to understand the simple fact that communism has been alive and well since well before World War I, and we are still fighting it to this day in America and around the world. Let that sink in. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. There will be more to come. So do your own research and take care.